Welcome back, everyone, to Stay in Your Lane. I'm your host today, John Mahle, brought to you by Triple T Transport. Today, got Chris Caplice with us. Haven't had Chris on in quite a while, so Chris, thank you for making time for us. And Chris's research, hit me with the title, Chris. I'm not looking at it in front of me. MIT research.
I'm a senior research scientist up MIT,
Scientist.
the executive director of our Center for Transportation and Logistics, and also chief scientist at DAT, Freight and Analytics. So got a hand and foot in both the academia and actually in industry.
That's got to be difficult having a hand in both.
It's so much fun. It's actually really interesting because you get to see both sides. It kind of tempers your research. So research needs to have an implication. But when you're working, in industry, you want to have something that's a little more. You get pulled to the more interesting problems. So I think it complements each other. I think one of the problems is that some people in academia are all academic and they treat like supply chain as something purely theoretical, and they're doing that, which great, that's operations research. And then in industry, if you're not looking at the fundamentals and the theory, you're missing something. If you're just doing it by your gut all the time. So I think being a bridge between them, I really enjoy doing that, to be honest.
So you get to balance the theoretical
Yeah.
side versus maybe the reality side.
Yeah, well, you say reality like the other side is bad.
Well,
But
no, I say theoretical and real, right? This is
yeah,
tangible. These are real
yeah,
numbers, right?
yeah. So
Versus theoretical.
but there's always something. So for the practical side, for something
Practical. There you
for
go.
dealing with that, a lot of times people react to thing each time, and they won't understand there's an underlying pattern or a condition. That's what theory can provide. So theory can help practitioners do a better job, because sometimes if you're busy putting out fires or whatever, you're not thinking about something underlying, and you also get caught up in your box. One of the biggest problems when you're working with someone who's really good at their job, especially in supply chain,
There we
is that
go.
they are really good at doing their job and they don't really think beyond it. So another thing that academia is pretty good for is stretching you and thinking, well, maybe think about the problem a little differently, because a lot of times people in execution don't have the luxury of time to sit back and think about something. They're busy, getting it and making it go. So
When you have to make it,
they complement each other.
you have to make the decision and go because you don't have time for anything else.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying it's a bad
Yeah.
thing. Been on
Yeah.
both sides.
Yeah, no, I agree. You bring up some good points right there. I think, this is why we have you on.
All right.
I think that, there's one thing to treat a symptom, but it's another to understand the root cause.
Mm-hmm.
And from the
Good way
academia
to put it.
perspective
I agree.
and the theoretical perspective, you maybe have a better vision of the root cause or a root cause solution. Joe, you still with us? Joe
I'm
Lombardo,
there.
everybody.
I'm there.
Joe is having some camera difficulty. At least that's what he's saying today. But we did move our clocks in the past couple weeks. So,
Right.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
On what shippers are seeing or what's out there? Or,
On from a theoretical versus
oh,
either analytical or a
you need both. You have to have both. You have to
Yeah.
have your academics, looking at the big picture, and plus you need people on the ground that are working the day to day. And as Chris said, man, he's a bridge to both of those worlds. And I spent most of my time in the operations world, as you say, the real world. But I did dabble a little bit in academics as teaching a class out in Elmhurst University on transportation strategy. So I can appreciate what Chris has said.
And
yeah.
then the other thing is that why practitioners help academics is that it grounds us and it helps us focus on what's important. And so it really, a lot of times some research will assume away all these complications, and that's what makes the problem really interesting. So both sides help each other. It makes it for better research, in my opinion. And it's starting to come to that. There's much more work on actually doing things that get implemented into practice, having an effect on the industry.
Okay.
Hey, John,
Yeah,
the
go ahead,
reason my
Joe.
camera's not on is I'm sitting here naked, all right? That's the reason.
Nobody
Thank you
needs
for
to see
not
that.
turning on your camera then,
Tell
Joe.
Diane, thank you for disabling your camera.
Heck yeah. Yeah.
So, and I don't want to. I would say I'm more direct, and I don't always process my delivery as well as Chris. So when I say real, I mean what I would say is tangible, or the floor that we work on here that we see becomes our reality, right? So
Sure.
your exposure becomes your reality. In this glass house that I live in, it's what's real to me,
Right.
and to what, to Chris's point and to Joe's point, we got to have both. So with all of that said, we've had
But let me say
3 years.
one other thing, John, about that, because it's really, people talk about the real world. When I was in the Army for the first 5 years of my
You were in
career,
the Army.
yeah, for 5 years, I was in Germany in Corps of Engineers, and we'd always talk about when we got out and joined the real world. And it became obvious that the real world is whatever you're doing right now. Everything's real, right? And so it's a matter of perspective for that. But I agree with you. Talk trucking. Go ahead.
Well, first up, I didn't see you as a military background. What branch?
I don't know how should I take that? Is that an insult? Is that a compliment?
Take it however you want. I was being honest. You're highly, highly, highly educated. I mean, you're MIT research scientist. You're DAT, analytics. I mean, that doesn't scream out to be as,
I went to a military school. I went to Virginia Military Institute for my undergrad,
VMI.
and then I served 5 years in the Army. Yeah,
Huh.
Very good.
that's why I got out. I got my PhD late. I was 35 when I finished my PhD, 34, 35. So yeah, I was in for 5 years, and then I went into academia. So
You
yeah,
didn't. You
I'm
didn't
a
choose to make
recovering civil engineer.
Okay. Now, you didn't choose to make a career in the military.
No, I did not.
Brothers,
No, it was
sisters,
great. It was a
anybody
great
else in the
time.
military?
Paid for my college. It was great, and I have a lot of good friends and things from that. It just wasn't for me long term.
Yeah, I understand that.
Well, thank
Joe,
you
how
for
about
your service.
you?
What's that?
Joe Lombardo, how
I,
about
I
you?
was I was a draft dodger. I was in Canada in the 70s. I came back in 1980. But Chris, thank you for your service.
Yes,
Mm.
Chris. Now, I remember, where was I? I want to say the Keys and the Army Corps of Engineers was working on something down there, and then at Lake Cumberland, the Army Corps of Engineers was working on the dam there,
Yeah.
just
I
here.
I was in a different
States.
part of the Corps of Engineers. I was in Hohenfels and Grafenwehr, Germany, building tank pads and things like that. I was combat heavy. So we weren't, you're talking about the civilian
Right.
Corps of Engineers. So yeah, I was in the 18th Engineer Brigade, which supported different units out there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, my neighbor was
long time ago.
Corps
Long
of
time ago.
Engineers, and they were in bridge building, in bridges, I would
They
say.
they do bridges, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of what we did would build temporary bridges, like Bailey bridges, things like that. Again, it was more combat heavy. So it was not civilian construction. But again, this was the 80s. This is like 85 to 89, long time ago. There's still two Germanys when I was there. The wall only came
Yeah.
down right at the end.
Yeah, that was the end of the 80s. Was it 89 or 90?
I want to say 89.
Yeah, I remember that.
I went through Checkpoint Charlie as a
Yeah.
lieutenant. So this was moments in time.
All right. Well, tell us, in these moments in time, Chris, after 3 years of what we would consider a freight depression, if a recession is 2 quarters going negative back to back, right? That was the definition of a recession. Then 3 years of very, very, very difficult transportation market, regressing. So we can call this our freight depression. And I would say you should be seeing some signs, or might be seeing some signs, that the pendulum is turning some, or will be turning some.
So
Hit me.
yeah, here's my 2 cents. I totally disagree with you. A recession and depression, it reflects a whole market going down. You got to understand this is a two-sided market, three-sided actually, but brokers and carriers tend to move in alignment. This was the best 3 years or 2.5 years for shippers, right? You got to understand this comes after 2 years of the highest rates ever, but the net the net of it, if you go back to like 2012 and draw a straight line, we're on a 2.3 to 2.5% compound annual growth rate, or CAGR. And so we're right back to where we were. This cycle, the pandemic cycle, which started actually 5 years ago, almost to the day of today, the month, right? It happened almost to the week. The first 2 years were through the roof with the peak demand, through all the, we can talk about how wise the government giving money away, the PPP and all that stuff was. But then the last 3 years has been, clawing back. But so you say depression, you say potato, I say potato. It's a different side. So when I talk to shippers, the first 2 years of the pandemic were horrible, right? Because they got fired, they blowing their budgets. And the last 3 years, they're recovering. And so you got to flip it around. Depends who you're talking to. As opposed to like an economic, no one does well in the depression, right? No one does well in the recession. For here, it's a buyer seller. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And everybody's down in a depression,
Yeah.
right? So if you're
Except John D. Rockefeller. He did okay. He did okay.
I think
Standard
there were
oil.
probably maybe some more people that did okay, but it may have not been on the legal side of the
Yeah.
of their
So-
industries.
Yeah, so the freight recession, the bloodbath, whatever you want to call it. So I like to think of it as the market, as far as I've looked at it, I've been doing it for about 25, 30 years. It's either inflating or deflating. Spot or contract. It's either going up or going down. I've yet to see a market where for more than 2-3 months where it stays flat. It's either contracting or expanding, rising or falling prices. And so the big difference here is, we saw that first 2 years of the pandemic, rates were wicked high. And then the next 12 months, it fell really dramatically. So that seemed to be the end of the cycle, but it went down so deep. The last 18 months have been like this slow, slouching, crawling out of a trough. It's not like it's peaking back up and we're just passing equilibrium. And now the real question is, are we going to stay at this equilibrium, or is some event going to trigger another cycle? My bet, and I'd love to hear your opinion, John and Joe, is I think we're going to kind of claw around here in equilibrium, a little more capacity coming out of the market. I don't see demand suddenly peaking anytime soon. Who knows what tariffs are going to be? There's so much uncertainty. I think we're going to be hovering at this rate where spot and contract bounce up and down a little bit. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Joe, I'm going to let you field
I would say, go ahead.
No, I'm going to let you field this one, Joe. Jump in.
I would agree with Chris. I mean, the chaos that we're seeing right now coming out of Washington with tariffs, and tariffs are on one day, they're off the next day. Again, chaos creates uncertainty. Uncertainty, has people stepping back. You can see that in the stock market. I mean, they say we've lost $1 trillion in wealth since Trump has been in office because of the ups and downs in the market. So. Again, I would agree. It's slow but steady. I mean, you got imports that have been up the first 2 months. Intermodal's been up the first 9-10 weeks. But again, a lot of that is because people were planning when the tariffs are going to be in effect.
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.